Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining me today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are continuing to reflect on our core values. In fact, this is the last one on the list. And number 6, right?
6, but technically there's no order to them.
Yes, in no particular order. Number 6, safety equals communication. And when we put safety equals communication as the last one, we took a little bit of flack from some people saying like, why is safety last on the list?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you guys recall that or not, because it's been a couple years. But
Well, when we were doing it, part of the whole thing is that safety, we think safety is communication. Duh. So, but you see so much stuff about just blasting the word safety. It's become almost anticlimactic. And what we're trying to do is humanize safety, because just saying safe for safety's sake, so that it's on your website or it's, whatever, that's not what we're trying to do. We're really trying to get it through the culture. We're trying to get it to understand how that affects each person on the team, all the people they work with, on the job sites with different vendors. We are trying to find a way to make it more humanized than just throwing a word up there, because, in the old days, everybody had it. You walk down a hallway and there's like 10 posters, but if it wasn't really lived out, it really wasn't relevant.
yeah, and the thing is, like, it's got to be part of the culture, right? So, and I think this is where we kind of were going with this when we came out of originally, is that putting a hard hat on doesn't make you a safer person, right? Wearing your seatbelt doesn't make you a safer driver. Like the safety apparatus protects you from an unsafe situation, but to be a safer person, a safer teammate, a safer safer in your own environment, a lot of that is personal responsibility. Like understanding your environment, knowing how to behave, knowing how to put yourself and your teammates in a place for success where you're not going to behave unnecessarily unsafe. And I say unnecessarily, and Dan, you and I have talked about this a couple of times, like safety can't be the only priority, because if it were the only priority, you wouldn't do anything, right? You'd
Bubble
say,
wrap.
Yeah, you'd say, well, I'm not even going to turn that Traco on, because as soon as that arm starts to swing, it's unsafe, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, when you look at it, part of, I think, what we really wanted to do, and you said it, Ford said it, is safety is like a result, right? Like it's a result. So nobody goes into anything, I would think, even the most risky thing, most dangerous thing that somebody does that you think of, they're trying to be safe in doing that dangerous thing, right? Like it doesn't matter. Like if you're going to jump out of an airplane, that's by definition unsafe. You're jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. But everything that person does leading up to that is about safely doing that. So it became such rhetoric with safety, safety, safety with what companies did. And we didn't want it to be that. And so we tried to identify what would actually make you safe. And I think one of the things we got to is if you communicate and you tell people how you're feeling or your view of the job or what you think the concern is, or even just vocalize, hey, I'm going to be in this trench, then you're being more safe because you're communicating the situation.
Well, I think one of the biggest safety concerns out there is assumptions. Like, you've been doing something X, you've been running a Traco for 10 years, you know what it does. And you just assume that everybody around you knows what it does. And really, assumptions are when you kind of have the biggest challenge for an issue, because you assume that someone that's doing X knows what they're doing or knows the safety ramifications. And in today's world, and in construction in general, and with new people joining the team and new people entering the workforce and coming to work in construction, they don't have that basic knowledge, or because they haven't done it before. And so they don't understand that, trying to jump across a trench, not a good idea. Back at home, maybe they jumped across the creek and it was fine, but this is a different type of situation. Or, when you're running a Traco, the back end swings out past the end when they can't see that. That's a blind spot. But someone that has not been in that machine doesn't understand that. And so assumptions are usually, it seems to be, the problem. So that's where this communication is key, because if you explain it to somebody, then they know not to be in that space because of the fact that you told them about it and you explained to them the reason behind things. So that's why we really felt that tying these words together both created the right culture and also created the right thing that we wanted to do, because every day we're teaching people things. They might not have done it before. They maybe did it before a different way, how we do it here. And so that's why the communication part of safety is the key.
Yeah, for sure. So that's a good synopsis. I think the episode still stands well and still is an obvious part of who we're trying to be every day and one of our core values. So here comes the episode, Safety Equals Communication. Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. This week's topic, we're continuing our series on our core values, and we're going to talk about safety equals communication. If you check it out on our website, you'd find the description, effective, consistent, and respectful communication is vital for the safety of our team. Every person is held accountable for giving and receiving safety-related feedback. So let's just take a few minutes here and let's sort of dissect that one. Let's talk about definition sort of what safety means for us at a base level, kind of, and we'll unpack it a little bit. Today's meeting, we've got myself, Brian, we've got Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we've got Dan.
Hello.
I'll jump in on this one because the challenge with the word safety in our industry and just across the board right now is that it is diametrically opposed to what we try and do. And the reality is that they can coexist. It's just about the communication and how people have received the word safety. When we put this together, the one thing we were concerned with is every website you go to for any kind of manufacturing or construction company says safety, right? It's just a word. They probably have a bullet point in their office somewhere or something else crazy. And we wanted it to be authentic and we wanted it to be what we actually feel about safety. Safety is paramount in that we're responsible for each other. We're responsible for everyone's families when we're out there working on a job site. But with that is the fact that work has to get done. We are in a dangerous industry. And the way to mitigate those issues is the communication between people. It can be hand signals. It can be toolbox talks. It can be 10-minute meeting in the morning explaining what's going to happen that day so everyone is aware of what the other people are doing on that site. And then we get to the level where we're working on most of our job sites we're working on. We're not the only team on that job site, especially the commercial world, the builders. So not only do we have to worry about ourselves, but we have to worry about all the other people that don't know our industry, but they're around us because they're walking into the building. They're pulling up behind a piece of equipment that we have there. And that's where it becomes such a team and communication factor where it's talking to the GC to make sure that they know who's coming on their site that day so that we can be a lookout for a delivery for somebody else, even if it's not for ourselves. And so that's where, I think from my perspective, I've seen too many. It's like, oh no, the safety officer's here or whatever you want to call it. And really they're trying to look out for everyone. It's just that making sure that that communication as well is done in a teaching manner and not there to be the school marm and try and slap people on the wrist. Sometimes, there is new things to learn on a daily basis. That's why we do some of the trainings that we do for safety factors for people just to get them out. The OSHA 10 is so that everyone has a baseline of understanding in the field of what they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times safety's like categorized in a couple different ways, right? You'd say the word safety and people think a couple different things. They think, the obvious, I think for us is making sure everybody goes home at the end of the day, like legitimate safe practices and keeping people, safe. But beyond that, I think, it conjures up some of these other messages that you're talking about, like, safety. A lot of corporate safety is designed around CYA. How do we not get sued? Right. Or safety is, from a production standpoint, sometimes safety people are like, well, overbearing safety precautions get in the way of doing work. They slow us down. So, and I think it can be all of those things, right? I mean, there's probably somewhere in the middle where, at the forefront, we are trying to make sure everyone goes home every night. They get to see their family. They don't have to worry about loss of life, loss of appendage, loss of sanity, any of those things. But I think there is a layer there where we're trying to corporately protect our organization as well. We do the right things not only because we think it's a benefit to our employees, but because we don't want to put ourselves or others at risk, or the longevity of our organization at risk. And I think that there is some metric where we've got to understand what cost or risk we're willing to accept or navigate along when it comes to that fine line between being safe and being productive.
Yeah. So, Brian used the word intersection or cross section or something you just said. And I think there's real value there that from my side is sort of the operational, getting things done. We got to move forward. We can't be productive if we're not moving forward, sort of thing. It conjures up that vision in my head that like this is just going to be safety can become a slowdown, it can inhibit how fast we can produce work in what we view as safely. But what we really struggle with here is that safety it's just inherent in what we do. Like we're being safe, and we have this discussion often on many different tangents, but we're being safe. Every one of us wants to go home every day, and everyone wants the people that work with them to go home every day. And if that's your target, that's your end goal or your starting point, whichever way you want to look at it, then you're working safely and you're trying to get things done as productively as you can. And so it's really important as we approach safety and approach growing as a company and bringing people on and having safety become a bigger, more vocal part of what we do, that we don't lose touch with we're trying to get the work done. And it is a dangerous job, as Ford said. It's not an easy job. It's dangerous in the sense of lifting heavy things. It's dangerous in the sense of deep trenches. It's dangerous in the sense of big equipment. So there's a lot of exposure in our insurance words there. But all those things, like we're saying, can coexist simultaneously and us still be very productive while being safe. And so we really try and walk this line where we're talking about safety and being safe and acting safely, but also being productive. And each person, whether it be a laborer, an operator, foreman, a lead operator, superintendent, one of the PMs, or myself, each of us is trying to walk this line where we understand and respect safety and also get production done. And I think that's where safety equals communication comes in, is we have to talk about it, but we don't have to over communicate about it. We just need to communicate effectively, and so that everyone understands what our expectations are and how we're going to produce the work. And then we should be able to do that without being inhibited by safety.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, let's just talk for a minute about why we correlated those two things the way we did. Safety equals communication. I think it's important to sort of dissect that. So when we talk about communication, we've talked about this before internally, and I think on the podcast before, but message intended equals message received, right? So you just said it. You hit the nail on the head. It's got to be clear. It's got to be concise. It doesn't have to be abundant necessarily, but it has to be a simple, understandable message. Sometimes it's repeatable. We kind of have different levels of that communication, right? So, and I think we can sort of separate the communication. So a big part of my job is risk management, right? So from a risk management perspective, we sometimes look at that separation, that office field separation, as like an internal, external type communication. So we were to say like, which way does communication go? So internal to external, like, and I'm not saying external to the organization, and I hate that division, but it exists. So I think from an office level, it's important that like we understand the work environment and the risks. We understand that safety needs to be cultural, not policing, so to speak. So how do we sort of make that piece of it effective? How do we make sure that internally we know what's happening in the field, we understand the risks, we associate the risks appropriately with different types of tasks, and we make sure our folks sort of understand expectations
Well, one thing I want to jump in here is like, you know, we've been in this business has been together for 17 years, give or take. And this is part of the growing process. It's part of the professionalism process that we have to deal with in that we now have and bigger clients, bigger job sites, more people on the job sites, and, wearing PPE. Maybe when we were 3 or 4 guys, that wasn't when we weren't on the certain type of job sites. We didn't do that as well as we should have. But now, that is part of the professionalism. You go into a job site now and you drive past a job site and you see a bunch of guys with cutoffs and shorts on and stuff. And like, it's a different type of mentality. And I think for people that have been with us for a while, they've seen that transition that we've had to make because we are a different thing than we used to be. And I think the other thing that we have to explain a little bit, from a perspective from a field team member that doesn't have to deal with the insurance companies and doesn't have to deal with some of the corporate stuff that we have to deal with, that we're trying to explain that to them so that they grasp a little bit of some of this new, like, oh, they just threw a new form at me, or, oh, now they want to do this and it's something different. Change is inevitable. And as we've grown bigger, our exposure has grown. We have now the captive, which we said we'll talk about at some point, but which basically means that we're liable for some of the any kind of damage ourselves. And part of that is just the adjustment that needs to be made. The secondary piece is that as you grow, there's new team members. When I worked for my father, it was just us kids and my dad, and we all had hand signals down because we worked together long enough that we knew what the other person was doing. But when you have a new employee, they aren't inside of knowing what that hand signal means, or they might not know what that is yet. And so part of it is us, as we're trying to teach and have new people join our industry or new people join our team, is that we have to constantly be thinking that it's not their fault or it's not your fault. It's that they just don't know. And so that's where the communication piece really ties back into how we can be a good, safe company.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, so what I was going to say there was sort of piggybacking on Ford's idea here is the reason that communication is key is because all of us don't know what the other person knows. And the only way you're going to know that is if someone says it. And we don't want to create a culture where someone's afraid to ask a question. Because if you're afraid to ask a question, that's likely how you end up in an unsafe situation. It doesn't have to be work. It doesn't have to be construction. That's true. That's just a flat truth. If you are in a situation where you do not understand the parameters of the situation, that's by definition unsafe. So safety doesn't have to be like, as visual as what it becomes. I think the part of safety that is sort of intimidating or a turnoff to a lot of people that are very very results driven is sort of, you picture like the giant word safety on a wall in an office, and like it has all these things about what safety is. But that poster doesn't make anybody safe. It doesn't do a thing. What makes people safe is people understanding their environment, understanding and knowing how to interact with the people they're working with, and then respecting that environment. And that's another point that Ford made about the PPE and the outfits. As I go out in the field, I don't have to wear a high-vis shirt in the office. I don't have to wear a hard hat in the office. But it's almost disrespectful if I go out to the field and I don't wear those things. And you got to make sure that you understand that, and that gets through, and that's who we want to be as a company. And it's a work in progress. There'll be times when I show up at the job site and I might forget to put my hard hat on. And we got to be open enough in the communication that someone's going to say to me, hey, you got to throw on a hard hat. Like, you got to throw on your vest, throw on a jacket, whatever, because it's important. First of all, it's respectful to the team. But secondly, it's no less dangerous if I do it than if someone else does it. And so it's just communication. It's being open enough to communicate when you think there is a hazard or a risk, and then we can react to it. And if the culture works that way, then you don't need a giant sign that says safety, because it's just part of what we do.
Yeah, I know. I'm just, I'm kind of thinking back to when we developed these, right? And not because it's a bad thing, but one of the big recommendations was, you got to have safety as number one, right? Like, put it on the wall, tell everybody you're safe, and something you just said there, you just struck a chord with, I think, all of us at that moment. But as we have these conversations, is like putting a safety sign on the wall doesn't make us a safe company. safety is a habit. Safety is a practice. Safety is knowledge. Uh, it's not it's not saying we're safe, or hey, look at this great policy we have, because if nobody follows the policy, it doesn't matter. So I just wrote this down, and I was curious on your thoughts here. And um, could we really boil it down to like, and this is just how my mind works, but like education and accountability. And I think it goes a couple different ways. Like you just said, like you get out of the truck, you don't have a hard hat on. Accountability, someone in the field felt comfortable enough to approach you and say, hey, this is a hard hat site. You need to have your hard hat on. Makes you safe, keeps all of us safe. And like that's an accountability component, right?
Correct.
Or the education side of it. Somebody like me, I don't get into the field very often. So I think it's prudent for me, and it should be part of my due diligence to have some level of formality and education about our safety practices. Because when I do go into the field, not only do I not want to put anybody else at risk, but I certainly need to know enough not to put myself at risk.
Well, and jumping back to the professional piece of it in relationship to that is that, like, we work for clients and they're our bosses during that job. And if we're not the guy that they have to constantly be harassing because we're not following the rules, that just shows a level of professionalism from our perspective. And, sometimes I'll go on those job sites that they don't have rules on that job site. And when I see our guys still trying to be safe, that's just a tip to the cap to those guys, because it's not that they have to be because someone's watching them. They're doing it for themselves. That's the important piece, not just for, oh, well, we got to check this box and make sure, because the GC said that this is what we do. This is doing it for themselves. And that's where safety is the most, we'll jump into the Mike Rowe thing about the safety's third, but we'll get into that level. But that's where it's important. It's not because someone told you to do it. It's doing it because you want to do it, because it makes your life better. That's the bottom line. And there is, some overreaching things that we can discuss on another day that really are outside of our control. But that's really it, is that when, we've had to terminate people in the past because they could not work within those guidelines. And that was very sad, because they were great people, but they just really struggled with following the rules. And unfortunately, we don't make all the rules, but, part of that is respecting the other people that you're working for, because they are the one that set the rules and we have to follow those.
Yeah. And so when we talk safety, and right as we're having this conversation, and I can think of a very specific thing. I think the most obvious exposure we have on a regular basis is trench excavation. It's putting utilities, putting pipe in the ground, right? You're digging a trench. And what really strikes there, I think, is a great example, is if I said to you, hey, we're just going to dig a trench that's 6 foot deep. So you're going to dig out the dirt, 30-inch pipe. You need 6 inches on either side. You're going to use your 42-inch bucket. You're digging 6 foot down. We can do that quick math. It's 200 foot. You got to get in a day, whatever it is, 300, 400 if we're doing well, 50 if we're having a terrible day. But if you're digging out that quantity of dirt, right? You say, okay, I got to dig out. You just do the math. I'm going to make up a number. The math thus isn't right. You're going to dig out 100 yards. You say, okay, well, I can dig out 100 yards in X. That's how much pipe I should do. Okay. But if you know you're 6 foot deep, you either need a trench box or you have to bench back. That's the two options. So if you view that you were always going to dig that trench vertically that way, then safety slows you down, because now you need to dig more, or you need to get a trench box and you didn't build it in. But if we all understand and communicate what our expectations are on how we're going to do this, that trench was always 4 foot at 42 inches and then benched back for the last 2 foot up. And it was never a problem. It didn't slow us down. We had always accounted for it. And so I think that really is sort of the cultural shift, the cultural migration that Ford talks about that we had to make, is that there was a time when we just went and did things because that's what we did, and because that's how Ford and his brothers and his dad, that's what they did. And then we got a little bit bigger and realized it was new people who brought some ideas to the table about how we had to do things, and we became more aware. And it wasn't a 6 foot trench. Maybe the trench was 5 foot. Well, it's only a foot extra. But it's all about communicating that this is our expectation, is we're going to operate within the confines of these guidelines as safety, so we can get people home. Because that's number one. Like, if we're going to rank things, it's number one. Like, number one is none of us ever want to have to make that call to tell somebody that somebody isn't coming home. I mean, I don't even want to think about it. Like if I think about that, that's the thing that makes you not go to work every day. Then number two is you don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. Like you want to, if we really want people to want to work here, to want to be part of the Berg team, you got to allow them to work in an environment that is optimal for them, or at least the best we can provide. And that's no different whether it's Brian and Ford and I having a nice office, or an operator having a nice cab in his machine, or a pipe layer having a nice clean trench that's appropriately dug so it doesn't have any chance of caving in on it. And so that's safety. But we don't need the sign. We don't need to, it doesn't need to be this big sledgehammer coming over top of you. It just needs to be how we do work every day.
Well, I think jumping back there, because there's also that other side of that fence where people, and this is the communication piece. So there's somebody new that joins a team. Maybe they came from outside the industry. They think things that are unsafe that are safe, that are technically safe, but because they don't understand it, they might be concerned. And so quick communication with them about what is the code, what we can and can't do, why we're doing what we're doing, would help put them at ease and make them feel more comfortable. Because as you said, if you're uncomfortable, you're nervous, chances of injuries and things could get higher. So that's part of it too, is even though you might have been doing this for 30 years and you've always been doing it the same way, and that's just why you've been doing it, 3 sentences to somebody new, explaining it to them, makes them feel more comfortable, makes them feel more confident that you're looking out for them. And across the board, it just makes everybody there understand what's happening in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. Let's just talk for a second. So, why is there a need for some level of formality when it comes to safety? We're experiencing this a little bit right now, right? We've said it a couple times. We'll say it again, and we'll talk more about it. But captive insurance gap analysis has given us some perspective on what formality looks like in safety. And I think we've mentioned it on the podcast before. We feel like we're pretty safe. Our guys are good. Our field personnel knows what they're doing. But what we don't always do well is formalize some of that. We don't always write it down. We don't always track it. We don't always necessarily have a handbook that says we're going to do it this way every time. So one of my questions as I go through all of this stuff and sort of trying to analyze as from an uneducated perspective about how the impacts of how it is in the field versus what it's supposed to say on paper is perspective, right? Like, is my definition of safety the same as your definition of safety? And not on the generic level of like we all go home, but for you gave a great example, trenching safety. Like, is my definition of what trenching safety the same as what your definition of trenching safety is? Does it depend on our experiences? Does it depend on, the environment, all of those things?
Yeah. So I'm going to go a really odd, sort of unrelated place here, but to give you the example and then work my way back. So I was talking to somebody in the company, and we were talking about it, an operator. And basically my take was they said he couldn't follow directions. I make it very simple. He couldn't follow directions. Said I gave him this very simple task to do. I went away to go do what I was doing, run the rest of the crew. I came back, did not do at all what I asked. So now this was a newer person, inexperienced, and maybe they can't run the piece of equipment. And I said to the person, I said, I don't think that's it. I was like, you told them to strip off all the topsoil. They said, yep. I came back and they're 16 inches deep, just blowing stuff off. And then other places are putting stone on top of topsoil. It's like, but what if they don't know what topsoil is? And they just sort of paused and looked at me, and I was like I was crazy. Like, how could you not know the difference between topsoil and subsoil? And I said, well, I'm just saying, if they ran the equipment effectively, like, I mean, you can, from what you said, like, it was flat, was graded. They did alter the Earth's surface appropriately. What if they just didn't know what topsoil was and you didn't tell them? And they sort of just said, like, I guess that's possible. I hadn't really considered that. And so there's the reason I bring that up is that's trench safety. Like, if you're in solid rock, you can just go straight down. But if you're in sand, you're going to have to slope or bench back. So the definition of safety is, it's paramount that you understand what you're working, or you don't know what safe is, because the books themselves say if you're in class 1, it's this, class 2, it's, you know what I mean? It gives you a guideline for what it changes. So that's why it's just paramount that the person responsible, the responsible parties, foreman, the lead operator, superintendent, or just an operator who knows what they're doing, explains to someone who might not know what safety is in that specific scenario. That way, if you walk onto the job site and you might say, Brian might walk in and say, wow, that looks a little dangerous. You know, and if you ask them, if you're feeling comfortable enough to communicate that you don't know why would you do it this way? Is that safe? It might take them a few seconds to stop and explain it to you. But if they said like, well, we're in rock, you know, there's no risk of collapse. So we can come straight up and then we're coming back with soil, or we stuff that soil back far. So it's, you know, we're sloped, not bench. They could explain it to you. And then you might realize they're actually following the guidelines of what safe is.
Yeah, that's great. No, yeah, go ahead, Ford.
No, I was just getting back to what you were originally talking about is the formality piece. And when you went through that audit and then we talked about it afterwards, the interesting thing was that was the piece we were missing, because as we were growing, that's the piece that was been lagging or trailing behind. The actual work and our actual ratios and some of that stuff were on point. It was that we hadn't taken the time to document it. And it's like, when you're in operations, you want to get things done. That's the part that is the marrying of the professionalism with the work. And if it's done right, it's not 6 hours a day. It's just something small each day, incremental pieces. But that's the difference of, and as we talked about the insurance, when we're paying our own, we're not just paying monthly and then it just goes away and it goes to the insurance company, they cover it. But what we have now, we actually are responsible for part of that. And how our rates and how much we have to pay is based off of our records. And our records are catching up now. We were, like I said, they were a little bit behind because we were worried about making sure people are safe in the field, which is the most important thing. But this is the second piece of that same scenario.
Yeah, and on the formality side, I think maybe, at least in my head, a clean way to explain it is we always say we're like being safe, right? And so being safe is cost effective. Like, move away from safety now. We're talking a little bit about formality and insurance exposure and costs. Being safe is cost effective. Being safe allows us to operate with lower margins and to be more successful, to generate revenue, and then hopefully to hand that revenue back to employees via benefits, salaries, better equipment, any number of ways. That's being safe. But planning to be safe saves you money before you ever start. So planning to be safe, being able to prove to someone completely outside this organization that not only do we have numbers that infer we're safe, but here's the processes we have that show you that we are planning to be safe, so that we never have to pay that money to the insurance or captive in the first place and then wait for it to come back to us. In fact, we can drive our rates down and make ourselves competitive day one. So, and that's sort of where safety comes full circle back in, is get the guys home safe, make it a good work environment. But at the end of the day, if you are safe, it will assist in making this company more successful.
That's great. That's probably a good place to wrap up. I just wanted to, a little anecdotal. I actually talk a lot about my inexperience when it comes to construction. I was here last evening. I saw two of our guys out in the yard helping each other out, getting some, you guys would know what they're called.
C-top inlet.
yeah, C-top inlet off a trailer. And the hand signals always impresses me. When two guys can communicate in a safe manner, know exactly what the other one's going to do or is asking for just by using their hands. It's pretty impressive to me as an unexperienced, uneducated eye. So yeah. Anyways, all ties back to the communication piece, making sure we can stay on the same page, making sure we understand the expectation. So great topic, guys. Look forward to having you back.